Hey everyone, welcome back to The Negotiation. And on today's show, we talk with Mathias Chaillou, a man with 2 decades of experience working for large multinational advertising groups like Carat, much of which was in China, and he's now the global head of strategic operations for Zenith, a Publicis company. On today's show, we discuss how China's video platforms like Youku, QQ Video, and iQIYI not only differ from YouTube and Netflix, but also surprisingly dwarf them in viewership, the formula for successfully securing business in China as an agency, the risk tolerance of Chinese brands and how it's changed over the years, and how the agency model is changing in China. Mathias, what is your favorite Chinese brand and why?
If you consider WeChat is a brand, I have to go with WeChat, and for 2 reasons. The first one is that you truly have the world in the palm of your hand, and the second one is that it's really perfect UX. What I find astonishing, having been back in Europe for a year now, is that WhatsApp's just not copying what they're doing.
Home to over 4 billion people, the Asia-Pacific region boasts one of the most powerful consumer markets on the planet. Not only is it home to half the world's under 30 population, but it's also home to more than half the world's internet users. It's a market no globally minded brand should ignore, but entering markets like China is no easy task. Just ask the likes of Microsoft, Google, Uber, and Facebook. Times are changing, and with the right partners, doors are slowly opening as more and more companies find success expanding into the markets of the Middle Kingdom. I myself spent 8 years in China, mostly as a venture capitalist, helping early-stage tech companies enter the Asia-Pacific market successfully. This show is dedicated to uncovering and examining successful China entry and growth strategies by interviewing the people behind those success stories. My name is Todd Embley, and welcome to The Negotiation, brought to you by WPIC Marketing and Technologies. Mathias, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me on.
Okay, so as we like to start out, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and your China story of how you ended up in China in the years that you spent there?
I got a phone call about 10 years ago from my company and the managing director in China asking me if I wanted to go there. And I was actually living in Italy at the time, and I really enjoyed the Dolce Vita. So I was a bit reluctant to go. But my wife, being more intelligent than I am, said this was things were happening in China and it was a huge opportunity and that we should absolutely go. So we did, and I listened to her. And so I arrived there being an account director for a big foreign brand which had acquired a local company, and I started learning how to do television in China. And then 10 years down the line, I ended up doing some Weibo, then WeChat, Alibaba, and ended up being an expert in e-commerce. So quite a long journey, 9 years, but I felt that I've done something different every day there. And that's one of the reasons I stayed for so long.
Can I ask you a little bit about what the industry was like back in the days when TV was kind of the medium of choice?
Probably the first year and a half or 2 years, everything was about the cost per rating point and negotiating with around 26 provinces, 1,000 TV channels, and really most of the work we did on the agency side was really cracking that. So that's what planning was you can consider China actually like a continent where every province would be a country. And so we spend our time actually meeting with media owners, going to restaurants, and it was a very traditional business that was, basically wholesale.
And what was it like transitioning from that into what we consider to be the digital age, if TV is analog?
Yeah, it's funny because when you live through it, you don't really see the transition, and it happens so quickly, and then you find yourself just in a different world. And I think there's 2 things that accelerated that in China. The first one was Weibo, and everybody thought Weibo, which is the Chinese Twitter, would be the winning media and that it would change the world. But also Youku and other online TV providers, so the equivalents of YouTube. Mm-hmm. And these guys arrived, and 2 years down the line, all the money was flowing on social media and online television, and at a rate much quicker than in the West. So we really saw the world transforming in just 2 years. but for some odd, it's a little bit like when you have a kid and you're sleep deprived, that the body makes it that you don't remember, you'd never have a second one. I guess speed of change in China is a little bit the same, where it's really intense, but oddly enough, you don't remember going through so many changes so quickly and through so much pain.
Did you spend a lot of time or get to know the Tudou and the Youku and the video platforms in China? We haven't had a lot of guests talk about or reference those, and I actually forgot. I even forgot that they were out there. But I mean, YouTube, obviously in the West, is massive. Can you speak a little bit to what Youku and Tudou are and how they're performing there, and how companies are potentially using them, and how it differs from how companies use YouTube in the West?
Yeah, well, you don't have just Youku Tudou, which merged and have actually been acquired by Alibaba Group. You also have two giants from Baidu and obviously Tencent Group, which are QQ Video and iQIYI, and three of them together kind of dominate the scene. If you think YouTube is big, these guys are much bigger. And you have to consider that there's not really such thing as user-generated content in China, because it's quite difficult, and there's obviously a lot of policing around content that's being produced and aired. But you do have to consider they are kind of a mix of I would say, less small production content that can be done by influencers or many other small producers, as well as big money content. So the likes of what a Netflix would look like. So if you look at Youku plus Tudou, I would say they are both Netflix and YouTube, and that's how big they are. And funnily, it's talking about these first 2 years. I remember that when we discovered them in China, they were actually not respecting any copyright, and they were built on broadcasting US TV stations without the rights. And the moment that advertising got into it and it became a business, that kind of changed, and we saw these players evolve into a really well-run, properly run, in line with copyright company, which it wasn't in the start, and that also happened very quickly.
Let's switch gears a little bit. Can you speak to the pitch process involved in securing business in your world?
I'm going to use again the word I was just mentioning, but like anything else in China, it's quite intense. There's a lot of pitching involved, at least on an agency perspective. When you obtain a contract, usually they're not as long. And in fact, the agency-client relationship on average is much shorter than what it is in the West.
Really?
Yeah. And I think it's under 2 years in China, if I remember correctly. And the turnaround times that you're given to pitch are actually very short. So when you have timelines in Europe of around 3 months, it's going to be 3 weeks in China. And so you can imagine that the intensity and the effort that's put into these 3 weeks is huge. And that usually calls for quite a lot of work on a very short time.
What is predicating the urgency, the quick turnaround, the timeline?
I think China just moves fast. If you look at what Shanghai was 25 or 30 years ago and what it is today, you understand that they had a lot of catching up to do. And they were very motivated in catching up. And so that's kind of something they picked up on, and that actually is probably part of the business culture now.
Is it also due to the competitive nature of how quickly things are changing and how taste preferences, platforms are all shifting so quickly and so rapidly?
Very, very much so. To the same, during the same parallel, the Chinese changed completely in 30 years. The cities change, everything changed so quickly. And so that has become part of what they are and the essence of companies. One thing I remember from China, or that I've learned, is this: don't look back, just move fast and move quickly.
Was there a particular formula that you landed on that helped you be very successful in securing, meaningful business projects?
I wish there was. It's hard. I don't think there's a single USP. What you really need to do is understand what the client wants and adapt your offer. When I arrived 10 years ago, what the global agencies could bring to the table was quite a lot of strategic thinking, as well as an approach to TV optimization, for example, having built tools that were then deployed and adapted to China. And that worked fairly well. But if you look at how we secured business in the last year, it was really about showing that we also, as a global agency and not a local agency, were able to really understand the ecosystems that Baidu, Tencent, and to a slightly lesser extent, Alibaba, Tencent, and to a slightly lesser extent, Baidu are, and that we could add a layer to that, a strategic layer to that understanding. So it's changed quite a lot. You do need to think about what you can bring to the table, though, that local agencies can't bring, or local players. And this is what's very specific to China, is that you have all the global players that are active on the market, but you also have very strong local players. And if you look at communications, you have people like Blue Focus or Highlink, which are really great digital agencies, and really are operating as well as the global ones. So, you can now come back and think about what is it as a global organization that you can bring to these companies. And, it sometimes is transparency. Sometimes it's about the capability that you have to say, listen, we can bring your brand outside of China, or other things. But you really have to think about what you can bring local agencies can't, because otherwise they will beat you on costs and on local understanding and the likes. Maybe there is one thing that is even more fundamental and common to every pitch in China is really the relationship you need to build with clients. 70% of a pitch is won before the pitch actually starts. And if you haven't built a really tight level of relationship with the key stakeholders, it's really hard to win on the RFP alone.
You mentioned understanding a client's needs as very important. When you're doing business in China, is understanding a client's needs a straightforward process?
I think it is. I think the feedback you get in many cases is very direct, and I find that generally you get honest feedback or very clear direction of what the client wants to achieve. And in fact, that sometimes reflects in how pitches are being carried out, where in Europe you have a lot, or in the US, a lot of what we call agency of record. So one agency managing a lot of all your communication or all your media. In China, that will be split, and you will be told, I want you to optimize, just my out-of-home buying. I mean, in many cases, people are very directive, and therefore it is straightforward.
Sorry, I'm not sure you heard me when I said I can edit that out, because I typically turn my gauge way down so that my mic doesn't pick anything up while I'm sitting while you're talking. I'm so sorry, but yes, you heard me say yes. You can just continue, and I can edit that out.
Okay.
Did you hear me say that?
Yes, I did. Okay. I thought you wanted me to continue.
No, yes, and I did. I just realized that when I said that, I didn't know if you could hear me because my gauge was turned to the bottom, and I'm just looking at my equalizer, right? And my voice wasn't showing up whatsoever. So anyway, apologize for that. Yeah. But no, you're good. You're good. It's easy to edit out.
So no, there's a lot. The brands are directive, companies are directive. They tell you what they look for. There are cases in which it was harder for them to give a non-Chinese feedback, but if it had to go through my teams, it did, and I usually know what the client was expecting.
I've heard, and personally I've experienced, where in China there are no no's. There are only varying degrees of yes, some of which mean no. Would you agree with this? And
yes.
How do you deal with this in a client relationship environment and in a pitch process where you're not going to get the blunt feedback you might, or the direct kind of, you kind of have to read between the lines, no?
You kind of have to. I could say the same thing about the UK where I live now, when people are extremely polite, and sometimes you don't get as quick as feedback as you would. It is true that in the Chinese language alone, there is no such word as a no. And so obviously that reflects into behavior. But, once you've been in China for a little while, you adapt and you understand, and you can read quite easily what's a polite no versus what a yes is. So I don't think that's a real, I haven't seen that as an issue. When a client wanted to tell us no, we understood very quickly.
Okay, good. Let's talk a little bit about the complexity of driving success for brands and partners. What does it typically take? And if you could maybe tease out some of the nuances of those complexities.
Well, complexities is a complicated word. I think it's just a different beast. It's a different market. And for any advertiser or business moving to China, the word would be adapt. And it's great to have principles, but you have to understand what needs to be kept within those principles and what you need to let go of. So I'll give you an example. You talked about brands in the beginning. Mm-hmm. There's a brand I remember, a local cosmetic brand, that's called Mary Dalgar, and they had done, so it's cosmetic, it's about beauty, and they had done a partnership with KFC, which by all I would say Western standards doesn't seem like the right fit for a beauty brand, and the co-marketing partnership they had done was actually to do lipstick shaped ice cream in the exact color tone of their new lipstick. And consumers loved it, and it was a huge success. And I can tell you for a fact that none of my Western clients that I work for would have done this just based on principles. So that's probably what I would, more than nuance, is you need to adapt to what's acceptable in China. And what's acceptable to a consumer or to a brand in China is much different to what is acceptable here.
Okay.
I've mentioned about being adapted. It doesn't mean you need to be different, and you need to have some level of consistency. I'll give you another example, probably in the other sense. I was working for a brand who was quite successful in China. I don't want to name them, and then all of a sudden they believed that they could increase their price substantially and position themselves as a much more premium brand than they were in Europe or the US. And after that, the moment they did that, their sales went down, and they pretty much died. And the piece of advice I would give to anybody who wants to go there is, again, adapt, but be true to yourself and what your brand is. And if you think that just because it's a new market where your brand is not known, you can have a huge premium or sell at a higher price than you would in Europe, you're in for a very bad surprise.
Is there more opportunity? Like what? And I think the answer is yes, because China is a little bit different. You talked about an advertising strategy for cosmetics, working with KFC, like something that other brands, Western brands, may not have touched. Is there, and I want to just look into that more, is there more opportunity to go in different directions, take more risks? Are there areas you can go further down and try new and different things where the unique aspects of China's culture, where they are very strict about some things but then are very lax about others, does that afford unique opportunities for you working with brands in China?
I think that it kind of accelerated at the end with all these new platforms and products and digital really empowering marketers to try out new things. So I would say yes, you feel a lot more empowered. There's a lot more to test. And except for a little bit of what you can actually put in an ad copy, the claims you can do, which are controlled. I found that there was a lot more liberty in China than we actually have here.
Okay, Matthias, great answer. Let's move over to talking a little bit about some of the overarching trends and how the media market is changing in China and has changed over the last, dozen years or so.
Yeah, well, I think that's a pretty simple answer to that. I think is the emergence of ecosystems, and we see that we've seen it in the West with Facebook and Google. But if you look at Tencent and WeChat or Alibaba and what they've built, it's absolutely changed the face of advertising, media, data, you name it. And so this is really changing not only the way we operate as agencies, but also how brands are able to be built and how they go to market. And so I think there's quite a lot of changes happening here. We see now brands being born on Alibaba. We see brands being born on social commerce. We see quite a lot of different ways to leverage these ecosystems. That's what's changed. So it's changed for advertisers, for consumer. It changes as well for agencies. And so, I mentioned in the beginning that, you have in China, you have the global players, the Publicis, the WPPs, you have the huge local players, Blue Focus and the likes, and you now have a third category of players when it does come to advertising and marketing, which are the TPs, the Taobao partners, which were originally people who were operating your stores on Tmall and Taobao, and they've moved into marketing as well because they understood that understanding Alibaba's ecosystem and being very close to sales was a great way for them to actually convince clients to work with them and give them their advertising budget. So yeah, the weight that Alibaba and Tencent have gained is fundamental, and it's changed the whole advertising industry.
Has the ripple effect of what they're doing in China been felt outside of China? And has it started to change the way we do things in the West?
I'm not so sure. There's one huge difference, I would say, between China and the West, and it took me a few years to try to articulate this correctly, but there's still a feeling in the West that a strategy is something that's laid at the top, kind of a tagline, and then it gets perfectly or consistently implemented in everything you do. So, the big notion of integrated marketing starts from this. In China, a strategy is kind of a way to synergize a lot of tactics and operational excellence. And it's how do you bring all of these together to build something coherent? So one starts from the top, the other one starts from the bottom. And I think these two approaches are so fundamentally different that what China does is going to take a lot of time to move outside of China. The same way a lot of what we do still hasn't made a lot of headway there because they have their own ways of approaching strategy and business.
Matthias, I wanted to ask about the difference between the West and clients and brands and customers in China as far as their receptivity and their appetite for risk or for trial or for testing. Are you able to build more of that into a project, a scope of work when in China versus maybe in the West? How has that changed? Talk about all of that little nugget.
So I'm going to do a parallel here with cuisine. And if you look at Spain, which today has some of the most disruptive cuisine, it came from a place where the food heritage wasn't that strong, whereas France, and if you go to Paris today, the food is not as good as it used to be, hasn't moved because it had such a strong heritage. And so I see China a little bit like this today. There wasn't a lot of, this is what a business is supposed to look like. This is how you're supposed to operate, because everything was new. And as a result of that, we've seen a lot of fresh ideas, a lot of disruption, and a lot of global brands now playing catch up.
Would you say that points towards what I've always felt, where when it comes to Chinese and their brands and their products, there's a remarkable lack of ego.
Well, that goes back to the exact point I was saying, and when you asked me why WeChat, and I was saying, I don't understand why WhatsApp hasn't copied WeChat. I think it's an ego thing. And I think the Chinese don't care. They don't care to copy. They don't care being copied. All they want is to be the best tomorrow. And so I think you're absolutely right. How is the agency model changing in China? Well, I think a little bit like everybody, like everywhere else, there's a question about these ecosystems and what that means for an agency to be from somebody who orchestrated every channel to a partner that is pretty much managing two giants. So that's a true question. And we still need to show value in doing so. So I was mentioning a lot of work on making sure that there was a great understanding and a deep understanding of these ecosystems, and what that has resulted in is really trying to work on delivering a product around what they have built. So if you take the example of Alibaba, for example, the way agencies are restructuring today is having a very strong commerce team, and within that commerce team, a very strong data science team who's able to work with the likes of DataBank, which is a kind of private DMP that sits within Alibaba, and the likes. So yeah, a lot more data, a lot more ecosystem. That being said, I believe it's also true outside of China. I just think that things have moved quicker there. And if you look at the budgets that are being allocated in these ecosystems, they've really overtaken everything else. Matthias, what is your best piece of advice that you can give to companies, brands, agencies going to China, existing in China, being successful in China? I think a simple answer to that, which I could give for many different in many different occasions, which is just listen. You need to listen. You cannot come in with a preconceived idea of what success is going to look like for your business, or how you're going to get there, of what a good communication plan is, or what a good agency model is. You need to go there. You need to understand the nuances. You need to listen to what people around you say. Again, the worst thing you could do is come with a kind of patronizing mindset, saying, I've built my business in that or that country, and I'm going to do the same thing, and I know how it works. And if you come in with that mindset, you're probably bound to fail. Brilliant. Matthias, thank you so much for coming on the show today. This was excellent. I want to let our listeners know, where can they find you, follow you, share your content, like whatever? Well, I'm not really present on social networks, but if people do want to get in touch with me, they can find me on LinkedIn. Mathias Chaillou, thank you very much for coming on the show. We really appreciate all your advice and insights today. Thank you, Todd. Growing a company is hard. Doing it in a foreign market? Exponentially so. The best piece of advice I can give you is not to do it alone. When you start looking across the pond for further expansion possibilities, and I sincerely hope that you do, make sure you choose the right partners to do it with. My good friends at WPIC Marketing and Technologies have almost 20 years of experience helping brands just like yours enter China. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Negotiation, and if you're interested in being a guest or want to connect with me or any of our team, please reach out to us at podcast@wpic.co, and be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. 再见。